So the manufacturers of one of the vaccines, which was the Moderna vaccine, which was one of the ones which took a tiny little bit of the genetic material of the virus and made it into a vaccine. And your listeners will remember that's one of the ones which needs to be in a sort of industrial level of deep freezer, because it was quite fragile in that respect. So it was a really good vaccine. Lots of people all over the world have had either the Moderna vaccine or the Pfizer BioNTech, which is uses the same technology. And I understand that the other company, Pfizer, are also working on a similar thing, but Moderna have got there first. And what they've done is really quite exciting, is they've used the genetic code from the Omicron 1 version of the virus. That's the one that was doing the rounds in December of last year and January of this year. And they've managed to make a version of the vaccine which works against Omicron 1, and they've combined it with their original version of the vaccine, which was the one made against the very first Wuhan strain that we've seen. So we know that the vaccine works pretty well against all the versions of the vaccine all the versions that the virus has thrown out at us so far. But it's not really stopping people from getting COVID in the first place. It is working quite well at stopping people from getting very seriously ill and in hospital. But Omicron has started to kind of overcome our existing defences. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners have had the similar experience to me, that they've had the full course of the vaccine, whatever they were being offered. In my case, I had 2 doses of the AstraZeneca, then I had a Moderna, I think, booster last autumn, and I still haven't managed to get COVID, and it was still quite ill actually, and that I think was Omicron 2 or 3 that I had. So by putting these 2 versions of the virus together in to make one vaccine, what we're hoping it will give us good protection, A, against whatever variations on the Omicron theme, which are bubbling up now. We are starting to see those around the world. And B, hopefully give us extra protection of whatever the virus starts to do in the autumn, because I do expect it to change again. And we now have the current version, the current variant, and the previous vaccine, which we know works quite well against all variants, put together.
Okay, and so now that it's been approved, what happens next? Who is likely to get it potentially, and when might that happen? And what kind of a difference will that make to the people who get it?
Well, here in the UK, it's been announced that we're going to get 13 million doses of this new version of the vaccine, but there are 26 million people who are eligible for an autumn booster. So I suspect that they will give this new dual vaccine to people who are especially vulnerable to getting very seriously ill with COVID and getting into hospital. So that will be the real elderly and the people with underlying clinical conditions that make them very vulnerable to very serious COVID illness. So the UK Medicines Agency is the first people to have approved this vaccine, but it's only a matter of time before the European Medicines Agency and the Food and Drug Administration in the USA also approves, I'm sure. So other countries might have a slightly different policy, but of course, bearing in mind that they didn't know this, combining those 2 things was going to work. Now that it has worked, we can now start manufacturing many more doses of that vaccine going towards the rest of the year. But so here in the UK, and I suspect other countries might have similar policies, which give this dual vaccine to the most people who are most vulnerable for serious COVID disease, and everybody else, certainly here in the UK, everyone else who's eligible for a booster will just get a dose of the previous versions of the vaccine.
Okay, and I believe that an expert from the JCVI was doing a media interview this morning, and he said that the uptake in each booster campaign seems to get a little less. How concerned should we be that people don't seem to be coming forward for their boosters in as big a numbers as they previously were?
Yes, I think what's happened is that when the vaccine was first approved, everyone was really, really super excited and desperate to get their vaccine. And there was an awful lot of publicity about it. It was in the news every single day. And also COVID numbers were also in the news every single day. Whereas now I think the world has moved on. COVID hasn't gone away, but it stopped being sort of headline news in the way that it was even a year ago. And also, therefore, there were lots of campaigns saying, please come and have your booster. This is where you need to go. This is what you need to do. Again, here in the UK, there were full page adverts taken out in newspapers encouraging people to come and have their vaccine. So that seems to have stopped. So I suspect people have just thought, well, COVID's gone away. They've had their booster last year or the beginning of this year, and they probably think, well, and then they got COVID anyway. So they probably think, well, do I really need to have a booster? Because I've sort of had a booster by having COVID, and anyway, COVID's gone away. So I suspect that. And then also the other thing that's happened is that certainly here in England, the big vaccination centres have closed down, partly because people weren't coming forward to have their boosters. So it wasn't really worthwhile keeping them open. So again, people might be unsure about where to go to have their dose. So people will be, if they're eligible for the booster, they will be contacted and they will be told what to do and where to go. And I would encourage any of your listeners who are in that category to actually come forward and do have their booster. But I suspect it's a combination of the fact that it's not in people's consciousness in the same way it was, and people kind of assuming if you've had your 3 doses and you've had COVID, you've probably got the best protection you can possibly have so far, and COVID's gone away anyway, so it's all fine. It isn't all fine, and having a booster will definitely help you to give some protection against very serious illness. I suspect that it won't stop you from getting COVID altogether, just because of the nature of the virus and the nature of human beings' bodies' response to the virus suggests that we can't stop ourselves getting COVID altogether, but we can use this to stop ourselves getting very seriously ill and ending up in hospital with it or worse, which nobody really wants.
Absolutely. And perhaps just finally then, maybe you could give us your predictions, if you like, for the next sort of 12 months. Obviously, it's the height of summer now, but winter's only a few months away. What might happen through this winter and into next year?
So we've seen that it's a seasonal virus and it has 2 seasons. It's a bit like the fashions. It has a spring-summer season. Each year, 2020 and 2021, we had a massive number of cases in March. So I know March was when it first got outside of China, but we had a really big number of cases last March, starting with the Delta variant that came out of India and moved around the whole world. And then we've also seen in the winter of 2020, the winter of 2021, a big spike when, as you say, when the winter came around, when the weather got colder. So the virus is still changing. It really hasn't settled down yet. So I do expect that we will have an increase in cases over the winter months. Now, we can only hope that because we've got the protection from various versions of the vaccine, and lots of people have had several doses of the vaccine now, we will have fewer cases and fewer people ending up in hospital and fewer deaths. And we have to hope that that's the true, we have to hope that that's what's happened, but it's not necessarily going to be true because we don't know what the virus is going to do. And as a world, what we really need to do is be aware of what the virus is doing and observe it almost dispassionately and say, oh, right, the virus is doing that now. How do we respond? There has been an awful lot of people who got fed up with COVID and wanted to tell the virus how it was going to behave next. There were a lot of people last winter saying, oh, well, it's going to be like a common cold now. And those people were going on the media and saying that, and therefore lots of people thought, oh, yeah, that must be true. Obviously it hasn't done that. So all we can predict is that the virus will keep on changing. We don't know in which direction, but there's quite a strong possibility that it will become quite nasty over the winter because it has done so the previous 2 winters. As I say, we can only hope that our our immune experience of the virus will help us from the really worst excesses of the really nasty COVID disease, including long COVID, and so during this coming autumn and winter. But I would prefer people to kind of be aware, have a heightened awareness of the fact the virus is still around. It is likely to do something over the winter, and we need to be ready to respond to whatever the virus does. I'm hoping that we will be not too far behind it. In the last couple of winters, I think we were like, oh dear, the virus is doing this, and we were a little bit too late to respond. We now have a lot of tools in the box, including knowledge and understanding, even greater than we had a year ago, of the virus and how to protect ourselves against it, that we could then use to say, right, the virus is doing this, the virus is doing X, we're going to do Y in response to the virus, rather than expecting the virus to respond to our timetables. For example, we wanted the virus to go away for Christmas, but viruses don't know it's Christmas. So we need to be able to say, okay, the virus is now doing this. Unfortunately, it is coming up to Christmas time, but if we want to stop people dying from this horrible disease, this is what we need to do, even if it doesn't really fit in with our partying plans, for example. So we have a lot of tools in the box. We should use them wisely by responding to whatever the virus is doing, and we can do that by observing the virus. We have lots of information, lots of very clever scientists who are doing lots of work on the virus, and we should take notice of the information that they're putting out and respond accordingly.